Hey, what's going on, y'all? Welcome to the Endless TBR. My name is Christian, and this is my YouTube channel where I love to talk about books. Thank you so much for taking time out of your day to click on this video where I want to briefly review and rank all of the books that I read in July of 2026. So, July was a really solid month for me. As I mentioned in some previous videos, I decided to not take any classes for Summer B. I just sat back and relaxed throughout the month of July and read some really good books. So I finished 12 books in total, which is two or three more than my usual monthly average of 9 to 10 books. Because of how many books I finished, I'm going to try to keep my thoughts on each of these pretty brief. I'm trying really hard to keep these videos like sub 25 to 30 minutes. I have a tendency to ramble. I guess we'll see how I do based off of the end time of this video. But I'm basically going to talk very briefly about each of these, rank them in order from my least favorite to my favorite. But before I do that, I do like to show y'all the books that I read so you can kind of predict what might be coming up next in my ranking here. So let's start with the 6 physical books that I read. First off, we have Eclipse by Stephanie Meyer. We have Dune House Harkonnen by Brian Herbert and Kevin J. Anderson. We've got Full Throttle by Joe Hill. Children of the Night by Dan Simmons. Intensity by Dean Koontz. And then I don't have the physical copy anymore because I was lent it by a friend of mine, but I did read Bromantasy by Mary Roche in physical format as well. Then I read 5 audiobooks. I read The Handmaid's Tale by Margaret Atwood, World War Z by Max Brooks, Honey by Imani Thompson, The Turning of the Screw by Henry James, and Stolen Tongues by Felix Blackwell. And I read one ebook on my Kindle, and that one is August by Callan Wink. So, yeah, those are the 12 books I read in July. Now, let's get into this ranking. Like I said, this will be from my least favorite read to my favorite based off of my personal opinion. Let's get into it. So, coming in at number 12 is going to be Eclipse by Stephanie Meyer, the third book in the Twilight Saga. I enjoyed the first 2 books in the series. You know, they're not amazing, but they were entertaining enough despite some of the character flaws I saw around Edward and Bella and Jacob. I overall enjoyed the first 2 books. When it comes to Eclipse, I did not really enjoy this one at all. Frankly, I thought it to be quite boring. I really did not like any of the characters. The main focus of this story is around the love triangle between Bella, Edward, and Jacob. And all 3 of them do so many things in this book that frustrated me and just made me not like them very much. Especially, there's one moment where Jacob straight up just like basically sexually assaults Bella, and that made me lose all respect for his character. And then Bella herself, too, was really frustrating as well. She just couldn't make up her mind. It seemed like she was taking advantage of both Edward and Jacob in multiple circumstances, and it just led to me kind of having a gross feeling the entire time I was going through like the first 80 to 85% of this story. And then we get to the big finale at the end, which even that I thought was not very entertaining. It, doesn't show a lot. There's like a little showdown at the end that I thought was frankly kind of boring. And then by the end of this book, I was just left with my hands in the air. Like, what was the point of any of this? So I'm not a hater of this series. I did enjoy the first 2, and I am looking forward to Breaking Dawn because from what I remember of the series, that one was my favorite. And I do enjoy the Breaking Dawn movies quite a bit. But Eclipse is definitely my least favorite of the 3, and I don't really like to talk negatively about books on this channel. Most of my reviews are positive, but this book just did not do anything for me. I really didn't care for it. So that's why it's coming in at the bottom of this list. Next up in number 11 is going to be August by Callan Wink. So I started a book club with a bunch of my coworkers. We all wanted to read some books together. So like 10 or 11 of us got together, and this was the book that was chosen for July, our first month as a book club. And I've mixed feelings about this book. On one hand, Callan Wink is undoubtedly, from the first few pages, you can tell he is a very, very talented writer. His prose, his description, the emotional moments that he has with characters are all written phenomenally. He is a great writer to the point where, even though I didn't really enjoy this book too much, I still want to check out some more of his other books because of how well he writes. One of my coworkers said it best. She said his writing is like a movie playing in my head when it comes to the sights and the sounds and the smells. He really nails all of that. But by the end of this story, me and a lot of my coworkers as well were kind of left with the impression of what was the point of this story. So it's supposed to be a coming of age story following this boy named August from the point when he's very little up until his early adulthood. And as far as I can tell, as best as I can kind of summarize it, I think it is supposed to be a commentary on young men being exposed to violence in their life and how it negatively impacts them, but even that isn't entirely clear as to whether that's supposed to be what it's about. It just seems like a series of events. And then when it ends, I was left like, what? There's got to be something else here. Like, we're missing something. I don't know what the point of this all was. There's certainly a commentary on violence. August is exposed to violence from a very young age because of his father, and that sort of builds up into his like high school years and early adulthood, where he is exposed to scenes of violence and like sexual violence, and it doesn't really impact him in the way it should. And I think that's what Callan Wink was going for, but it's hard to explain. I just don't really feel like it ever got there. So, a great book when it comes to the quality of the writing, but as far as the overall story goes, I was just left wanting a lot more out of this book. So, that is August coming in at number 11. Coming in at number 10 is going to be Bromantasy by Mary Roche. This was a fun book. This one I kind of categorize as like a good time, an easy read. Didn't really dislike anything about it, but there's nothing super memorable about it either. After a couple weeks, I'd already kind of forgotten some significant parts of this book. It just wasn't like the most exciting thing I've read. The story basically follows these two best friends and lifelong roommates, these two guys that, they're great friends, but they also secretly kind of have romantic feelings for each other. And it's set in this fantasy world. And they get into a little bit of trouble. They get into like a bar fight, and they get sent on this quest to go hunt down and kill a dragon because of this fight that they get into. And it's basically just a tale of them bonding and slowly revealing their feelings for each other along the way, with a lot of other stuff thrown in there as well. But like I said, this is an easy read. It only took me a couple days to get through. It was fine. It was fun at points. It was enjoyable. The main characters are entertaining, and I do like their chemistry a lot at certain moments. And there's this one little girl character in the story that I thought was very cute and very sweet. So, not a bad book by any means. If you're like a very casual fantasy lover, then you might get some enjoyment out of this story. But ultimately, like I said, it's just kind of forgettable. I don't think this is a book that I'll be thinking about after I make this video. I might be like, oh yeah, I read that book. It was, it was fine. It was okay. This is like the definition of a 3 out of 5 for me. It was like an okay, solid time. No major complaints about it. I just didn't love it. So that is Bromantasy by Mary Roche. Coming in at number 9, we have Dune, House Harkonnen. This is book 2 in the Prelude to Dune trilogy. If you've seen some of my previous videos, you'll know that I was not a big fan of Dune House Atreides when it comes to the, I think, 8 Dune books by Brian Herbert and Kevin J. Anderson that I've read so far. That one was definitely my least favorite. This book, I liked it a little bit more, but it's still towards the bottom end of all of the Brian Herbert stuff. I thought more about it, and I think I finally realized why I'm not really vibing with this trilogy. When it comes to the other books that I've read by Brian Herbert and Kevin J. Anderson, the Legends of Dune trilogy, which took place like 10,000 years before the initial Dune story, and then you have the House of Dune trilogy, which took place like 100 years after that. None of those characters are characters that appear in the Frank Herbert stuff. These books right here, the Prelude to Dune trilogy, this is, Leto Atreides, Duncan Idaho, Thufir Hawat, Gurney Halleck, Baron Harkonnen. That's what I was trying to say, Baron Harkonnen. And I think most people that have read Brian Herbert and Frank Herbert's stuff will admit Frank Herbert's material is much more elevated than Brian Herbert's stuff. I still enjoy Brian Herbert and Kevin J. Anderson's writing, but these books are much more popcorny, very much more shallow than Frank Herbert's stuff. So now that I've gotten to the point where I'm reading about characters that I've already heard from Frank Herbert's voice, I think it's detracting from the series. And as I'm reading these scenes with Duncan Idaho and Leto, these characters that I love Frank Herbert's voice. I'm struggling to connect to them in these books because they just don't feel like the same characters. But just looking at the merits of this book alone without the Frank Herbert stuff, it's a fun story. It's a little more entertaining than the House Atreides story, which I really wasn't that invested in. The political circumstances around House Atreides were okay at best, I thought. In this book, there is some thrilling stuff that happens towards the end of the stories that I was very invested in, especially around Leto Atreides' character. I did like Gurney Halleck's storyline in this book quite a bit. I thought his plot arc was kind of one of the strongest points of this book. One of my main criticisms, though, is as always with these Brian Herbert books, it's too long. This is 750 pages, and there are entire plot points of this book that I feel like could have been taken out and it wouldn't detract from the story at all. For instance, I love Duncan, Idaho, but I think you could take out all of Duncan, Idaho's story out of this book. It would be like 150 or like 100 pages shorter, and it wouldn't detract from the story at all. So that is Dune House Harkonnen. I'd give it like a 0.25 stars higher than House Atreides, but still definitely not my favorite of the Brian Herbert stuff. Coming in at number 8, I listened to the audiobook version of it, but I actually own the physical version as well. That's true for 3 of the books on this list. That is Stolen Tongues by Felix Blackwell. This was a reread for me. It was kind of one of those moments where I was looking for a new audiobook, struggling to find one to listen to, and I was like, "You know what? I enjoyed this story. Let me get the audiobook version of it so I can experience it in a different format." And if you've watched my videos, I love Felix Blackwell. He is one of my favorite authors. His stories are incredible. Stolen Tongues is definitely the one that kind of put him on the map. It's one of his most highly rated and well known stories. My hot take when it comes to Felix Blackwell is Stolen Tongues is probably my least favorite of his stories. Now, I still enjoy it. I still think it's a good time. It's spooky, it's creepy. The story follows this couple named Felix and Faye. They are staying at Faye's cabin in the woods owned by her parents. And Faye has this history of sleepwalking. And as they're staying in this cabin, there's this strange presence that's like lurking outside their cabin, saying weird things in the night, mimicking people's voices, and it starts to invade Faye's dreams. And as she's sleepwalking, you can tell that there's something weird going on with this presence outside that has somehow created a bond to her. And Felix, the main character, is trying to figure out what the heck is going on. Turns out this presence has like a tie to some ancient, like native lore in the area. What I'll say about this book is the opening, super creepy. Like the first 100 pages of this book, I was like, wow, this is disturbing. If I was in this situation, I would be losing my mind, scared out of my mind. I think that Felix Blackwell does such a great job with the setup of this book. Ultimately, by the time I got to the end of it, I did think it was pretty repetitive. You get to like the middle portion of the book, and he starts to kind of repeat some of the same instances, but with very minor tweaks to the point where I was like, it's new, but it's not really that new. And it did start to feel repetitive towards the second half of the book. But I did overall enjoy it. I did like the lore that Felix was able to attach to this mysterious being, and then he builds upon that in another book that he wrote later on called The Church Beneath the Roots, which is a book that I love. So definitely check that out if you've read Stolen Tongues and you want to get more lore out of it. But a good time. My least favorite Felix Blackwell book, but still a nice time. It makes sense because this was written as a short story initially that he posted on Reddit, and people just like freaked out and fell in love with it and were like, you got to make it longer. And so he did. He turned it into a full length novel, but you can tell that this was originally like a short story that he tried to beef up because it does get bogged down and get a little bit repetitive once you hit that halfway mark. But still a great time. That is Felix Blackwell's Stolen Tongues. Coming in at number 7 is going to be The Turn of the Screw by Henry James. This is a book that I've wanted to read for a very long time because it's one of those classic horror tales that I've heard about for years and years, but I never got around to checking it out. Well, I decided to check it out in July, and this is another one, mixed feelings about it. I actually read it twice because I listened to it in audiobook format, and I had a a very difficult time following it. It's just written in a way that is, definitely much older. Some of the language used, I had to pause, rewind, pause, rewind. I'm like, what is happening in this scene? I don't really know. So once I finished it in audiobook format, I realized that I didn't feel like I got enough out of it. It's very short. It was only like 3.5 hours. So it wasn't like this huge time commitment. So what I decided to do was go back, get the text version of it, and read along as I listen to the audiobook version. And that is what I highly recommend y'all do if you want to experience this for the first time, because being able to read along with it while listening to it just really helped me understand what was going on in this story. But it was good. It was really good. It was, like I said, definitely old school, but there are some creepy moments in here, and it has to deal with this woman who is slowly kind of losing her mind as she's taking care of these children in this big house. The main lord of the house is kind of away. He was like, "Don't disturb me. Watch my kids. Take care of the house." And there are these like specters of previous workers at the home that are kind of haunting her and interacting with the children in very creepy and bizarre ways, and definitely some unsettling stuff. It's all about those psychological mind games of what is real, what is not real, and we're kind of watching this woman go through this portion of her life not really understanding what is happening to her. So really good stuff, very creepy. Definitely recommend it. It's just it was tough. Like definitely one of the most difficult reads that I can remember in recent memory. Probably one that I'll want to revisit again because I still feel like I was missing some things, but it was cool to see some classic literature like one of the OG ghost stories come to life. It was very cool. So that is Turn of the Screw. Coming in at number 6 is going to be Children of the Night by Dan Simmons. I did post a short review of this on my channel if you want to check it out, but another mixed feelings. Like I have multiple books this month that I just have mixed feelings about. For this one, I was very excited to get into it. I loved The Terror by Dan Simmons, and so this was my second book by him that I was just really wanted to read another Dan Simmons book and experience what he had to offer. This book has an incredible setup. The first half of this book, 5 out of 5. I loved it. It is about this woman. I'm trying to remember her name, Kate Newman. That's right, Kate Newman. She's an immunologist working with very sick children in Romania. She comes across this one boy who is just so deathly ill, but something bizarre happens when she gives the boy a blood transfusion. Turns out to have been the wrong type of blood. It should have killed the boy, but it heals him of all of his illnesses for a brief period of time before he becomes sick again. Well, Kate realizes that he might hold the key to curing like AIDS and cancer and all these giant diseases that are, killing a ton of people. And so she begins to experiment on him. She forms an emotional attachment to this boy. So she decides to name him Joshua, bring him back to the US where she can kind of study him under better circumstances. Well, it turns out that Joshua has a link to the original Dracula. And so now these cultists are breaking into Kate's home, trying to steal Joshua away from her and bring him back over to Transylvania. And that first half of the book was amazing. The science of Kate trying to figure out what was going on with this kid, the creepy aspects of these cultists breaking into her home, and like the opening scenes where she's in this hospital for children that is just decrepit in awful conditions, like really creepy, unsettling stuff. I loved the first half of this book. Then something significant happens in this about the midpoint, and the tone of the book changes completely. It turns more into this like action thriller buddy, like road trip like thriller. I don't know how to describe it, but it's basically these two characters going on this road trip all across this country and going from like destination to destination, looking for clues, talking to people, trying to sneak around bad guys. Like there's multiple sequences where the two main characters encounter like a roadblock and they have to sneak around a roadblock. And it just lost all of that suspense and horror that I really, really liked from the first half of the book. So, second half of the book, didn't really care for it. Luckily, the ending, like the last 30, 40 pages or so, I do think tied everything together nicely. So, I ended the book with, good, happy thoughts. But it was a little disappointing because that middle, like that 100 pages towards the second half of the book, just really lost everything that I loved about the beginning of this book. So I've talked a lot about it, but that is Children of the Night coming in at number 6. Coming in at number 5 is a book called Honey by Imani Thompson. I listened to this one in audiobook format. And I'll start off by saying I am definitely not the target audience for this book. This book is all about feminine rage, social politics, gender politics. It is not aimed at like an early 30s guy. That being said, I was very entertained by this book. It follows this woman named Ursa. She is a professor, and she just is having a lot of trouble with men in her life. She's dating this guy who's just not a good dude. He's kind of a piece of crap. And she starts to get fed up. And when she gets fed up, she starts to eliminate those guys from her life. Like, permanently, she murders them. And she begins to do the same to men who are negatively impacting other women in her life. And she starts to develop this habit of, hey, whenever this guy does something that pisses her off, take him out. He's gone. So it is a story of a main character who is doing undoubtedly terrible things. Um, but she is a total badass. Like, I was, even though she's murdering these guys, 100% I was in her corner as she's going. And there's more to the story than just that. There's a lot more to it, but I don't want to say too much more because I feel like this is a book that's easy to spoil, but just know that I thought the main character was awesome. I was totally in her corner when she was going after these guys because I'm like, you know what? He is a piece of crap. He doesn't deserve to be alive anymore. That sounds really dark. But anyway, but the other thing too is Amani Thompson's writing is great. The main character feels a lot of anger and rage at society as a whole and just, crappy men, and I felt that coming through her words. It was a very powerful book, very beautifully written in some areas, even though it does tackle very dark themes. And yeah, I was just very entertained by this story. Definitely recommend checking it out. And even though I am a guy, I do appreciate the themes that Amani Thompson put into this book, and it did give me a lot to think about. And it made me appreciate like the female perspective on a lot of different issues. So that's on a more serious note, and she's a badass and she kills dudes, so that's cool. So that is Honey coming in at number 5. Coming in at number 4 is going to be Full Throttle by Joe Hill. This is one of his short story collections, and it is the last short story collection that I have to read by him. As always, I don't even know what to say anymore about Joe Hill. I love him. I love his writing. He is so talented, and I'm almost done reading all of his books. I have 2 more to go, but this one was very fun. I don't know if I like this one or 20th Century Ghosts better. There's a couple stories from 20th Century Ghosts, which is his other short story collection, if you don't know, that stick out with me a little bit more, but there are some great ones in here, especially one story that is called Late Returns. That's about this guy that is running this like mobile bookmobile for his local library, and it has the ability to go back in time and visit people from the past, and he can rent them books that they need. Like it's tough to explain, but the people from the past need a type of story to gain some like closure in their life, and this man is able to go back in time and give those books to those people, and it was a very touching and emotional story. I actually started to get a little teary-eyed towards the end of it. It's funny because I feel like Joe Hill and horror are kind of synonymous, and that short story definitely was not horror-based at all. It was much more dramatic and emotional, but that one was really great. Let's see here. Oh, and then there's In the Tall Grass. That one has a Netflix movie based off of it. That short story was awesome. Another one in here is a story called Glittering from the Circus of the Dead. Very uniquely written, very disturbing. I loved that story as well. So, a great collection here. Not every story I thought was incredible. There were a few in here that are a little bit forgettable. Like, as I'm looking through the table of contents, I look at like the titles. I'm like, I don't really remember what that one was about, so more of those, more so than in 20th Century Ghosts. But the stories in Full Throttle that hit me really hard, and I thought were incredibly written. So that is Joe Hill's Full Throttle coming in at number 4. Next up at number 3 is a book that I listened to in audio, but I also own a physical copy of, and that is World War Z by Max Brooks. This was a book that I intended to read, but then I heard some really great things about the audiobook, so I decided to pivot and read it in audiobook format instead, and I'm really, really glad that I did. So this book is like an oral telling of a zombie apocalypse. It doesn't really have anything to do with the movie at all, so get those thoughts out of your head. I had attempted to read this book many years ago when the movie first came out, and I watched the movie, thought it was awesome, read this book or started this book and was like, this is nothing like the movie, this is stupid, and I stopped reading it. All these years later, I decided to check this one out again because I was like, I don't think I gave this a fair chance. And after finishing it, I'm like, this is way better than the movie, in my opinion. I love this book, but it is basically this interviewer named Max Brooks, based off the author, is going around and interviewing people from around the world about this zombie war that happened that nearly wiped out the entire planet. And it has its normal zombie stuff, like people killing zombies, shooting zombies, people being eaten alive, like the mass chaos and pandemonium that you would expect from a zombie apocalypse. The thing that really surprised me is this book tackles so much more than just your basic zombie stuff. It talks about what are the social ramifications of a zombie apocalypse? What are the economic ramifications? What are the religious ramifications? Like, what do people, like religious people, see this zombie apocalypse as according to their religion? And there's even more than that, but it's all about the social ramifications of this apocalypse and what society looks like after something like that happens and what people think about the events as they were occurring. And the reason I'm really glad I listened to the audiobook version is there's no repeat characters in the story besides the narrator, Max Brooks, the interviewer. And so each chapter is told by a different person of a different dialect from a different country. And it was very cool to listen to this huge cast of actors and actresses with these different accents and these different backgrounds. And I thought it just really added something to the experience of the story that reading it in text wouldn't have conveyed. So if you're interested in World War Z, or if you've already read it, but you just want to reread it, I definitely recommend checking out the audiobook version. It's one of the coolest audiobooks that I've listened to, and it was such a unique and awesome zombie story that I just was not expecting to like this much, but it was definitely one of my favorite reads of the month. Coming in at number 2, we have Intensity by Dean Koontz. I am slowly falling in love with this man. I read Watchers and then I read this one, and this book is just really, really awesome. I have a short review on my channel of this one as well, but it is basically about this woman. Her name is China. She is staying at a friend's house, and while she's staying at a friend's house, this man breaks into the home, starts murdering all the family members, and China has to figure out how to stay alive, avoid this man, try to save some people along the way. And it is just an excellent, like, cat and mouse story of China and this killer whose name is Edgeler Vess, basically just trying to take each other down. Like, they are trying to stay one step ahead of each other. And it was just thrilling from beginning to end. This is one of those books that starts and it does not stop. And I loved both of the main characters, both China, the protagonist, and then the antagonist as well. Vess is just so creepy and disturbing and nasty, and every time he was on screen or on page, I was just captivated by his presence. His whole thing, based off of the title of the book, is he seeks intense experiences. So he goes out and murders people in horrific ways to try to just like gain novel experiences that can kind of like send his senses to the moon. And the dynamic between those characters was awesome. And China is another one, kind of like Ursa from Honey, just one of those badass characters who just does stuff throughout the book where I'm like, you go, girl, like you get him. That's incredible. So I really like this one. After finishing Intensity, I definitely want to go to my local thrift bookstore. They have a huge selection of Dean Koontz books, and I'm like, I'm fully invested in him as an author now. I want to buy up a bunch of them. That's how much I enjoyed this story. So definitely check it out. It's exciting. It's nonstop. Great characters, great action. Definitely a great book that, yeah, I highly recommend. And then you're probably wondering, man, you just talked all hype about Intensity. How could there be a book that you like even more than that? Well, there is, and it's this one right here, The Handmaid's Tale by Margaret Atwood. I listened to this one in audiobook format, but I do own a copy of it. And wow, this is an incredible book. Like, when you finish a book and right off the bat, that is one of my 10 favorite books of all time. That is immediately how I felt after I put down this book. Or finished listening to this book, I should say. I finished it and I said, wow, that is If not in my top 10 favorite books of all time, it will be a book that I always think about when I'm making like a top 10 list. This will always be in contention for it. I love, love, love this story. So, just to give a little background information, I have watched the first two seasons of the show on Hulu many, many years ago. So, going into the book, I had already known the plot and kind of like what happens in the story, but I just heard so many incredible things about it and I loved the show. I thought it was an amazing show. So I just wanted to kind of experience the story again. And wow, the show is incredible. The book is even more incredible. And it's all about Margaret Atwood's writing. She is so phenomenal. And I think the thing that stuck out to me the most was obviously the plot of the story is very dark. It is dark and gross and disturbing. If you're not familiar, it is a kind of dystopian society where there's been like war and nuclear fallout, and it's caused the fertility rates in women to just plummet. And so they're having a population crisis. And so they get these women who are fertile and they send them off to live with like the commanders, like the leaders of this society, where they're basically their only purpose is to breed and have children for the commanders. They're not like the wives of the commanders, they're just their sex slave. And, that's all they do. And they're just treated horribly. They have no rights, and it's very scary to read about. But the thing that Margaret Atwood does is she writes this terrible, dystopian, scary situation with an air of like sarcastic humor. It's very much like FU energy, if you know what I'm talking about. If you've read it, I think you'll get it. But she has like dark humor. She's sarcastic. Her metaphors and similes that she uses to describe some of the just disturbing ass stuff that happens in this book is mind blowing. And I loved it. I don't want to say anything about it because I don't want to spoil anything for somebody that hasn't experienced this story, but definitely check it out. And as somebody that watch the show and you're like, I already know how it is. If you've watched the show and you haven't read this book, read the book because it does elevate the story to a new level just because of how incredible an author she is. And this was my first Margaret Atwood title. The second I finished this, I went on Libby, I put The Testaments on hold, which is like the sequel to this book, and it actually just became available this morning before filming this video. So very soon here, I'm going to be diving into the sequel here, but an incredible book, an easy 5 out of 5, and like I said, one of those books that I'll always be thinking about, that whenever I think of my favorite books of all time, this will be in the conversation. All right, y'all. So I think this video is still just as long as my usual ranking videos. I get carried away. I start talking about these books. I get really passionate and happy about it. So yeah, probably another long video. But if you stuck through the video this whole time, thank you so much for being here. Thank you for checking out these books. Let me know in the comments if you like my ranking, if you agree with it, if you don't agree with it, which books on this list that you've read, and how you would kind of rank them or review them. And yeah, stay tuned for more videos. My name is Christian. This is the Endless TBR. As always, stay safe out there and peace out.